The World Bank and a trio of Western government agencies announced a financing package for production of the Johnson & Johnson coronavirus vaccine in South Africa, part of an effort to scale global production and meet demand for billions of doses. The 600 million euro deal, which comes to about $712 million, announced Wednesday will support Aspen Pharmacare in producing 500 million doses of the shots through 2022. Of that amount, 30 million will be produced for use in South Africa in 2021 out of a total of 250 million due by the end of the year. Joining us to talk about vaccinations and the impact on economies in Africa is Gospel Obele, an economist. Gospel, thank you so much for joining us. Good morning to you.
Thank you for having me.
Excellent stuff. So what do you make of this? Because South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa has been going on and on about allowing African countries to be able to produce vaccines. What do you make of this World Bank deal and what's taking place?
I think it's very important because, the IMF had projected that vaccines, containing the spread of the coronavirus and policy support are three critical legs upon which global recovery would happen. And that also means that for African nations, being able to find a way to navigate those three critical points, all right, talks about how possible they would be able to recover from the pandemic and all that. So South Africa positioning itself to be able to produce and also engage on the distribution chain and all that also talks about the fact that they're partnering and engaging across those three legs. Now, for countries that are not being able to do that as a result of core structural issues, that would mean that would still be at the reactive side of the value chain.
Aha. So what do you make of Africa generally and the capacity of the continent to be able to produce these vaccines?
Well, I don't think in the real essence of things that the continent is strategically able to meet up to vaccine production, but rather when you think about it in terms of effective and strategic partnerships like what you have in the South African situation, there's a possibility around that because then again you want to be able to reduce importation costs and all that has to do with vaccine distribution and inclusion and effective management of that administrative process. So it largely depends heavily on strategic partnerships and leveraging economies of scale, all right, that other institutions have to bring. But Africa in itself may not be strategically positioned enough to meet that demand, which is very critical for recovery.
Okay, great. Now, with all those factors you've mentioned, how bringing it here to Nigeria now, how confident are you that we could see this deal here? I don't know, this deal that's been executed now in South Africa here, which I'm basically asking you about Nigeria's capacity to produce vaccines here. So, what do you think?
I think positioning is first important, and positioning the story around the need to jump into the global recovery narrative, as it were. If you notice, the Nigerian economy has been growing slower than the 16-17 recession and all that. So, and part of it is because we are not being able to effectively boost local production of vaccines and even leverage all these partnerships to ensure that more Nigerians can partake in the global recovery process, as it were. Tourism has been affected, hospitality has been affected, and many other sectors like that. So I think it's first to position our story around recovery and what do you want to make out of this recovery process, not just turning out policy stimulus and all of that, and ensuring that we're doing the structural work that needs to be done around infrastructure, around getting individuals to become more aware about the process, and also building vaccine inclusion, which is very important for our own client, because you have situations where vaccines are being hoarded, for some certain reasons and all that. So not as if you don't have the vaccines. There's also the politics around vaccination. So all of those dynamics have to be properly dealt with, and the story has to be properly positioned that we want to recover and want to jump into the global narrative of recovery. So partnerships are critical.
Great stuff. So as you talk about the Nigeria's capacity to produce these vaccines, what about including South Africa into the conversation now? What's the wider economic impact of being able to scale these vaccines appropriately?
Of course, it will mean that a lot more Nigerians will be strategically ready and positioned, all right, to engage the world, all right, or to engage the new world that we live in. Vaccine certificates are becoming critical travel documents, all right, and they're becoming the natural filters around who would access what opportunities in the global environment today. So making that inclusive and readily made available for your own people, all right, would mean that you're trying to position your country also to play in the bigger picture of where the world is headed today. And over the time, we've seen that even big brands, aside the vaccine conversation, even big brands and anything big, in quote, that comes into Africa, to a large extent comes through South Africa.
Right.
All right. And then you want to make a boost around the Nigerian market. But you don't have a market cannot be developed if the players involved are not strategically positioning those market dynamics to engage, right? So the big question around how do we engage is what's on the table, all right, so that we can compete, how would I put it now, to recover on a competitive level,
right,
all right, along with South Africa and other nations of the world.
Fantastic. I have to bring you in on the prior conversation. I'm sorry, I'm switching now from vaccines to housing. The prior conversation we just had, affordable housing in across Africa. So the African conversation, I mean, we could be here for the next hour, right? But I really want to get your thoughts as an economist. What do you make of Nigeria's housing deficits and the challenges being faced, and whether or not we can possibly scale affordable housing across this large population that we have?
There are many complexities around the affordable housing conversation in Nigeria, just like every other thing that you want to think around social inclusion and all that. Because when you talk about affordable housing, you're talking about social inclusion also.
Right,
all right. So those challenges exist in different pockets. All right. There's a mortgage financing issue. There is a disposable capital issue. There is a real estate sector development question. There's also the policy or the politics around affordable housing and all that. All right. So if you put all these dynamics together, you realize that we need to begin to think about solving these problems at the different pockets and tying them up strategically to ensure that the average Nigerian can access affordable and formal housing, because those two are very strong legs upon which productivity will take place, and then before you can find a significant reduction in poverty. Yeah.
Gospel, you see, with all the challenges, again, I said we could spend another hour just talking about vaccines and the impact on economic impact. We could spend another hour just talking about housing. There's also power. There's also, I mean, insecurity. How is it overwhelming, or can it be prioritized? All these different touch points that affect Nigeria's economy, from housing to everywhere else. How do you make what do you make of the prioritizing of these issues?
Well, first of all, it's painful to state that we are in a place we're where we are right now because of a long history of indiscipline. All right, now we are at the verge of collapse, in the sense, in quotes, and it's such that every of these items you've lifted, power, and the economy and all of that, are interwoven, all right, they're interdependent, sort of. So you can't prioritize one over the other in the sense, and that makes the art of policy. That's why you talk about policy becoming an art, all right, and the science around dealing with these issues in pocket, yet ensuring that there's a strong level of coordination among these things, and you're not dropping any ball, as it were. All right, so it's very critical to take everything at a go, in quote, and then strategize within all those pockets what are the key priority areas, considering the nature of the Nigerian economy and its people, which are largely structural than just policy.
Great stuff. So I like that answer. Largely structural, the social issues. What do you make of the, and I don't think we only got like a minute to go, but the poverty question, because a lot of the discussion we had was about how poverty factors into this affordable housing. The quest to get 100 million people out of poverty, what do you make of that, and how, how realistic it is?
Quite frankly, I don't see that happening, because Nigerians are getting poorer by the month. Not because they are not earning more incomes, but because there's a lot more pressure. There are different cost pockets, or pockets of rising costs on the economy that hit directly on the consumer's pockets. All right, and when the naira is being affected and the consumer cannot afford to do more, right, to raise his hopes of aspiring or becoming something within the context like this, in that case, you shrink them further in the system, and it becomes difficult. So that's what we term as a poverty trap. All right, until the politics and the structural issues are properly aligned, cutting across the fiscal and monetary institutions, we may not be able to get a significant amount of persons outside the the poverty trap and all of that. So it's beyond just one social intervention policy. It's a lot of synchronization that has to happen to get people out of the poverty trap, and it's largely structural.
Final question, about 30 seconds. There's an election in less than 2 years. Continuity or policy continuity, and I don't know who's going to win. How much of an impact does that play in where we're trying to get to?
Of course, it's going to create a huge impact. For instance, we can see all that from subsequent change of administration and all that, and that's one of the major issues. So there are big questions around policy design in the first place, policy execution, implementation, and all that. Now, the bigger question is the continuity of these policies. All right, so in the first place, it has not really worked, but to a fair extent, it has worked. But then how do you plan to continue? All right, and then policy now becomes at the mercy of politics, in the sense. So politics are the major issues around how do we develop countries and emerging markets with the social issues that they face as administrations change and all of that. So it's a big question that we need to answer.
Big question. The African conversation is just wide, and we hope things work out. Gospel Obele, economist, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate your insights.
Thank you for having me.